Welcome back to Composition and its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers that are interested in composition. Fugue for composers is anyone who wants to compose their first fugue. When it comes to fugue, there are mental blocks and technical blocks. So technical blocks, I think a lot of composers spend way too much time doing counterpoint and not enough time doing harmony. When it comes to counterpoint, when it comes to four species counterpoint, for example, they teach you to do random suspensions that are divorced from any harmonic context. You cannot use that in a fugue. When it comes to mental blocks, a lot of composers are Bach, 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 and they over-worship Bach. And what happens is they study the best of the best of the best, the art of the fugue, and all these complicated, like highly, highly technical, complicated examples that Bach didn't even do on a regular basis. And then they try to bring that into their first fugue, which is ludicrous. So in today's video, we're going to take it down a little bit. We're going to look at some Bach. We're going to look at suspensions in Bach, but we're going to break it down. And in part two, I'm going to show you how you can start hearing suspensions in your fugue. Let's begin. Okay, so on the screen here, we have an example of five-voice counterpoint. So this is kind of like a famous example, at least in France, for composers and for people studying fugue. And one of the reasons it's used in a number of French conservatories is the beauty of this passage is only possible at five voices, okay? So I first brought this to your attention if you watched the Are You Ready for Fugue video, two-part video on my website. And I talked about like how much counterpoint, like how many voices is necessary. And I basically said, spoiler alert, that 6 voices and beyond just becomes a waste of time, to be honest. But I did mention that 5 voices could be very useful, specifically because of this example. Though it is not a fugue, it's still like contrapuntal. It's only possible at 5 voices. So let's start with analysis. So clearly it's in G major. If that is not automatic for you, that is a huge problem. And I'm not saying that to demean you, but you really have to work on that because you're going to really struggle with a fugue if you can't figure out the key immediately. Notice that he starts off with a 1 chord as we'd expect. So we have that low G in the bass, and then the other voices come in on the second part of the measure. Notice the main harmonies. So in the second measure, downbeat, we have a E, okay, between tenor and bass. So once you see that fifth relationship, it has to be that root position chord. What else is it going to be? So it's a 2 chord. And likewise, using the same logic, when we go to the third measure, we have a B, F sharp. Boom. It has to be the 3 in G major. What else is going to be? So that root fifth relationship is really important for cementing the fact that it's a root position chords. Now let's look at some of the additional harmonies. So if you look at the second part of the measure, for example, measure 2, we have a set plus 6-3, we say in French. I don't know how to translate in English, but basically in French notation, we're going to indicate the presence of the leading tone above the bass with a plus sign. You don't need to know that for this particular series fugue for composers, but just so you know, because I do use that notation. All right, so that's spelled on the 7th scale degree, but it's in first inversion. And how do we know that? Well, we have that A in the bass. We did have an E in the tenor, but notice it is jumped to the A. And then we have the F sharp in the soprano. So it really is going to feel like, from a listener perspective, that we have a change of harmony going to the chord built on the 7th scale degree, but in first inversion. In the third measure, we have on that second half, the second big beat, we have a B to a G. Okay, so that's going to, 6th relationship, we're going to hear that plus that D in the soprano. We're definitely going to hear that as a change of harmony, not a massive change, but a slight shift to the 1/6 chord. So another thing to mention is harmonic rhythm. I don't want to talk too much about it, but it actually is going to become quite important for fugue. So in this particular piece, the harmony is changing. The fastest it's going to change, based on what we see, is every half note. The first measure, it stays constant for the whole measure, but otherwise, just every half note is not going to be any quicker. So therefore, when that tenor goes to that G, that is an actual change of harmony. It's not just passing motion, it is an actual change of harmony. All right, so now we're going to talk about the suspensions themselves, but I just want to mention, I hope you've already seen, we haven't talked about the counterpoint, right? We're talking just about the harmony. So if you have a major struggle of harmony, which it is very possible, especially if you're coming from American tradition, because they don't actually teach harmony. Okay, they teach music theory, which is the harmony. If you have struggles, then that's where you to go, because that's probably what's holding you back in fugue. It's not that you can't do invertible crazy counterpoint. That's quite easy. That's not that hard to learn, okay? But it's about how to manage the harmony. All right, so notice that soprano does a 7/6 suspension. So that G in soprano is set up as a consonant in the first measure, and then it becomes a dissonance when we have that A in bass, okay? And then that G resolves to the F sharp. But how is it possible? Because so in premier ton, it's in French, at the beginning of the measure, it's A E. So that's A C E. It's some kind of 2/7. Here is the seventh. So that F sharp can't possibly resolve in this harmony. If we look at this other auxiliary example, right, you can hear very clearly now, if the tenor were to stay on that fifth, it would very definitely be a dissonance. Now, of course, in your own style, in your own fugue, in your own language, it may not feel like a dissonance because you want to be consistent, but certainly for Bach, it would be a dissonance. So how is Bach able to do this? We'll notice that sur le troisième ton, it's in French, on the third beat, or the second big beat, he jumps the tenor to that A. That has, it's not just for expressive purposes, which certainly it's nice, but it allows us to understand this second part of the measure as a change of harmony. I'll say it one more time because I know it's the first time you've probably heard this. So the first part of the measure, it's definitely a 2 chord. We're going to perceive it as a 2/7. But that 7 in the soprano, when it resolves to the F sharp, it actually resolves into a change of harmony. So the harmony changes at the resolution, so the F sharp actually belongs to that new harmony. This is really, really amazing, cool effect. And it, quite frankly, when I studied in France, it took me time. It took me time to really observe it and to hear it and to be able to do it. And fortunately, I had a teacher that was very persistent on bringing it to her attention. So maybe I will do that on this channel. But I do think it's something that we need to be aware of if we want to broaden our perspective and just enhance our vocabulary, harmonic vocabulary for fugue. Also notice that the alto 1, going to that second measure, is doing a 9/8 suspension. So we have that B is a consonant. It's held over into the next measure, becomes a dissonance with the bass, and then it has to resolve. Notice that it resolves to the A, which belongs to both harmonies. So that jump in the tenor wasn't for the alto 2, because that resolution was always going to be part of that harmony. It's more for the soprano. In the following measure, notice that alto 1, we have a 9/8 suspension. So that C is held over, okay? It's prolonged, okay? Becomes a dissonance, and then it resolves down to the octave, okay? Notice he also fills in the time, so instead of just doing a half note, he fills it in, so it's just more contrapuntal. But notice that the harmony is more important. The counterpoint are the details, quite frankly. I just want to mention, I think it was the last video I did on this channel about a week ago. I think it's called Suspension in Your Fugue. I go into this a lot more detail, and I show much simpler examples, very simple, and then I show you how to do it in your fugue. And I show you how to test suspensions, what to do if it doesn't work. So you may want to check that out if this is a very new concept for you, which it likely is if you're coming from an American tradition. Again, counterpoint teaches us just how to do random suspensions divorced of harmonic context, which is not a usable skill when it comes to your fugue. Some technical things that we do in counterpoint, they're great, it's important, but it does not compare to actually doing harmony. Also notice in this third measure, we have another 7/6 suspension, but in different voice. So this is in the alto 2. So the A is held over. It becomes a 7th against the new bass. And then it resolves to that G. But again, that G doesn't belong to the harmony of the first chord. We have a B, F sharp with tenor and bass. So Bach has changed the harmony. Instead of leaping in the tenor, this time he has the tenor changing its note because the harmony is changing by the half note. That allows us to have these double suspensions. One quick thing I want to just mention is do not try to apply this right away. I think there's a tendency right now, society, people are very scatterbrained, so they see something new, oh, I gotta do this. And then you start over, you start using fugue, you put it in your fugue before you even really understand it or really master it. That's not what we want. I just want to bring this to your attention so you can start thinking and start exploring other options, but don't be irrational about it. All right, I want to just end showing you how I'm applying some of this in my own fugues. Before I do so, I just want to mention that I have a preparation for fugue course up on school.com/composition. It is meant for composers who want to get ready for fugue, but don't have all the harmonic skills or need to polish them up. So it features suspensions, modulations, and sequences, which are really important for fugue. And the first tutorial is now up. It features 4 suspensions for a bass exercise. So go ahead and check it out if you want to get ready for fugue. Okay, so on the screen here is a new subject that I started for a new fugue just to kind of test certain things out for this channel. So it's from Iphigénie, which is a masterwork by Jean Racine, a French poet, dramatic writer. And the first thing, of course, you gotta have a subject and a subject that you love. But something else I want to mention, I don't think I've mentioned it enough on this channel, is you also want to compose a medium that really interests you for your first fugue. One of the problems I think for composers when they do their first fugue, they just assume it has to be piano, partly because it seems more practical. Okay, I can hear it played back in real time. I can perform it if necessary. Maybe my teacher can play it for me. But one of the problems is with a fugue for piano, you're limited about what you can do because the pianist has to be able to do it, which means fugues for piano are very, very hard to execute, especially well. You may find it just like much easier to do a fugue for string quartet, or a vocal fugue where each part is confined to a separate player. The first thing I do is I write the subject in its rawest form. Il retourne à l'hôtel pour le sacrifier. So this is a pivotal moment, pivotal scene where the servant is revealing that the king is going to sacrifice his daughter. And so notice I have certain details that I didn't capture. I'm singing that I didn't capture. So now I want to start capturing them. So one of the first things I do after I get the subject in its rawest form is I want to get the correct meter. This is obviously really important because the subject and response are going to come back frequently, and you want to be pretty sure like this is like the form, this is the rhythm, everything is like very tight. So notice here I have ilato. Big thing is I have that pickup, and I decide the a tone is going to occur on the big downbeat. That's really important. Okay. Then notice here that I kind of experiment with a different meter. Notice I changed from 1/4 to a 2/4. Oh, you can't do it. That's nonsense. Okay, so first things first, when you're composing a fugue, it's very legitimate as a composer to change time signature, especially to change the meter, especially for vocalists, you want to bring out certain natural accents. That is your right as a composer. So if you find in your fugue you're asking for permission or you're not allowed to do certain things, that's a big problem, and it's one of the reasons probably you can't finish a fugue. Notice in the next example that I just simplified the meter to something that had as little time signature as possible. It still captured the meters, the accents that I wanted. Now I want to test the suspension. So notice in this first example, it works, but I don't love it. So one of the things you have to be careful of is you have something that works, okay, it's functional, it might meet the happiness of your fugue professor, but you're not feeling that oomph. And the way you want to think about this is almost like a relationship or going on a date with someone, and it's just like you don't feel the spark, and it's just you can't waste your time on that because then you're going to lose interest, you're going to get stuck. That's often why we get stuck. We don't feel that spark, and you're going to be wasting a lot of time. So if you don't feel the spark, even if it works, you have to put some more effort until you find something that really, really excites you. So in this last example here, the concept is similar, but notice that I have mon père. Iphigénie is screaming at her father, of course. And notice that I delay the resolution for much longer. This is something that excites me. This is something in my own style. even if it's not the style of Bach. I don't care about that. It's something that I like, that I enjoy, and that's what you need to seek for your fugue. I hope this gets you on the road to completing your fugue. If you have not completed your fugue or not worked on your fugue today, please get to work and shut off YouTube and get to work on a fugue. If you'd like to start working on preparation for fugue, doing exercises, then head over to school.com/composition. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. The soprano must be on the tonic, and its note prior must be the leading tone. And we see a 4/3 suspension marked, so the soprano does F, E, F for the ending. The suspension must be prepared so the F in the soprano is set up on the 4 chord. The half cadence. Measure 3, fermata. The bass is on